I'm assuming most of you guys have heard about my retirement back in March. I attempted to keep that kind of low-key and right off into the sunset, and that did not happen. That totally backfired. But some really good things have come out of it, and I'm gonna touch on that in a minute. But I'm gonna take you back to kind of my journey to where I was to where I am today, and in a quick timeline of how that happened. I had parents that were strong believers, and I'm very grateful for that. Blessed to have both of them that made us go to the Wednesday Sunday school, or the Wednesday Bible studies, the Sunday school sermon every Sunday. Hated it growing up, didn't understand it, but now really appreciate it. And I've got my wife and 2 kids here now that I'm trying to push a lot of these same things that I learned as a kid. I shouldn't say learned, that my parents were attempting to teach me as a kid. But then my goal was to get to heaven. I'm thinking, man, what is the objective here? Yeah, I want to be a good person. I want to be known as a Christian or follower of Jesus. But really, it was so I could get to heaven. And if that means sucking it up for the Wednesday studies over at the house and listening to my mom and dad preach for an hour every Wednesday night, and going to church every Sunday and maybe missing a baseball game here or there, whatever sport we were in at the time, then I'll do it. I'm going to try to explain how that goal shifted from getting into heaven to understanding that I'm already in as a follower, as a believer, that I'm in, and that goal shifted to, I want to take as many people with me as I can. Now, you guys will be able to relate to this. When I'm in high school, we're all in high school, it's great for a year or two. And then I'm ready for college. Like, man, high school's awesome, but college, that's where it's at. I get out of the house, go do my own thing, get to college, year or two. I want to start my career. I want to start my career in the real world. College was fun, but this is where it's going to be at. This is where I will be content and at peace. Well, I signed in 2000 with the Atlanta Braves and start my career in professional baseball. And I'm thinking like I have died and went to baseball heaven. Like it cannot get any better than this. I'm getting to play a game and get paid to do it. Although in the minor leagues it's not a ton of money at all, but I'm getting paid to play a game. And sure enough, I think you guys see where this is going. I play for a year or two in the minor leagues, and man, I got to get to the big leagues. Like this isn't what I thought. This isn't doing it for me. Make it to the major leagues. And you want to talk about spoiled. I mean, we're incredibly overpaid, as you guys all know, where you don't carry your own bags anywhere. The food is they make it, we're spoiled rotten. So I'm in the major leagues for a couple years. It's like, man, I need a long-term contract. Like, if I could just get this, if I could just reach this goal in my bank account or in the amount of years that I've played in the league, then I'll be there. Then I'll be in a spot where I can kind of relax and be satisfied and be at peace. It doesn't happen. It is unbelievable. I have never set a worldly goal, and you can ask my wife because I'm starting new projects weekly of goals and new things, and I'm all over the place, and she's left to pick up all the pieces. But that's a whole nother deal. I've never set a goal where I've reached it and been satisfied. And last Sunday, Actually, my son and I got to go throughout the first pitch for a Nationals game in D.C. for their playoff game. And it was awesome. Got to go back and reconnect with a lot of old friends and spend a couple of days there. So I got to lead chapel for both the Dodgers and the Nationals that Sunday. And one of the things I said, and there was probably, 12, 15 guys from each team in there. And one of the things I asked was, have any of you, and these are guys that are at the peak of their jobs. I mean, this is the major league. These are guys that are at the top, that have pretty much reached all their goals that they had as kids to make it. They've made it. And I asked, have any of you made it here and reached some of these goals or any of these goals and been satisfied? And every one of them just kind of shook their head. Like, no, we haven't. And it took me a few years to figure that out. But all these things we chase, whether it's money, drugs, alcohol, sex, status, every one of them leads to a dead end. And I had some awesome mentors throughout my career, some awesome chaplains and teammates, and Scott was one of them over the last 10 years in the off season. So it took me a long time to realize that, and when that hit me, that, man, there's a hole in every one of our hearts that we're born with. And we try to fill it. I tried to fill it with baseball in my career of moving up the ladder, thinking when I get here, I've arrived. I'll be happy. Doesn't happen. Every single one of them leads to a dead end. They may bring instant satisfaction and very brief satisfaction, but in the end, it's a dead end. And I finally handed my life over to Christ completely. And this is still a work in progress. I don't mean that like I have things figured out or I'm perfect by any means, but I finally understood what it meant to really take the blinders off and start seeing things in a different light. And taking the focus off of myself, or attempting to take the focus off myself and shift that to other people. And maybe I'm walking the clubhouse and see a teammate that's struggling with something that before I'm so focused on myself and preparing for that night's game that I may have missed that, opportunity. And it's been the most freedom, the most joy and peace, no matter what the circumstances are. Don't get me wrong, when things aren't going well, when you've got a sick family member, we lose a job, whatever it is. I'm not saying we're all smiles, but we can smile at the fact that it's really not the end of the world. Like, we're here for a lot bigger purpose than to just play the game of baseball. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to this past spring, and I had a decision to make on whether to choose my family or the game of baseball. And I'll be honest, this was probably one of the easiest decisions that I've ever had to make, and really for two main reasons. Number one, my family. This game eats up about 7 or 8 months of the year, and it's not quite half, but close to where I'm on the road, and it's a grind. I do not say that to complain at all. It is very worth it, and don't regret that decision at all. But it's a lot of wear and tear on my wife and kids with the time away and the things I miss. So it had been on my mind, the last year or two. Now I will say the second reason here is a lot bigger than just my family or my time with my kids, even though that's incredibly valuable. And I do see at 14 and 13 years old that window is closing rapidly to impact their lives. And I see that. I know realistically, I may have 4 or 5 more years left with my kids, and I'm sure a lot of you have kids out of the house. And man, I have been amazed at how I feel like they were toddlers a year or 2 ago. And shoot, I got a freshman in high school and an 8th grader. So I saw that. And then I was introduced to the world of sex trafficking. This had been weighing on me for a while now. Scott and I were talking about it before service, and he remembers me coming back from first trip into trafficking and just being like, man, I don't know if I can go play the game of baseball. After what I just saw and what's going on, not only in these third world countries, but right here, I don't know that I can go back and play. I mean, I was leaning towards, almost looking for maybe a reason to shut it down, to retire. And the situation with Drake, all these things pulling together, made it very, very clear that this is what I was supposed to do. And I have no regrets. Sex trafficking, and I apologize, there's really no way to sugarcoat it. It's not a real exciting topic. But I was introduced to it about 3 years ago. Was the first time I'd ever heard the word trafficking. I couldn't have told you what it meant. And a friend of mine, who's now my partner in this fight, Blaine Boyer, with the Milwaukee Brewers, active pitcher, and we came up in the Braves organization together, introduced me to a guy named Matt Parker with the Exodus Road, who was out of Colorado Springs. I happened to be in Steamboat Springs. Blaine makes the introduction. Matt drives up that day and starts sharing with me what he's doing in some of these other countries. And he was a pastor for 7-8 years, picked up his family, moved to the Philippines, India, kind of long story there. But started telling me about this issue in Southeast Asia that he's been fighting for, I think then 2 or 3 years ago. He was probably 5 or 6 years into it. And it was just heart-wrenching stuff. And I hadn't even seen it. This is just listening to Matt talk about his organization and show us some videos, some of the stings and some of the operations they did overseas. But he kept saying every year, and he would come into spring training for a year or two, and about every few months he'd come in and stay for a couple days, and we'd catch up, and he'd fill me in. He's like, you guys have to come over. You have got to come see what this is all about. And so I did. Blaine and I went to Thailand for, I guess, about 10 days. And we did a couple days of training with Matt and his team, and then spent the next 7 days in the red light districts between Bangkok and Pattaya, a couple places in between. And I mean, I saw like just the underworld of evil. I mean, the devil's playground. To the point where when I came back, I mean, I couldn't talk about it for a couple weeks. I saw the way people were treated. You would never think that a human being could treat another human being like that. I was seeing some of the most poor and deprived and helpless, kids trapped in situations that nobody deserves to be trapped in. So it was really neat to be a part of that. Really, my biggest fear going over there was, as a man, I knew going into these brothels where there's going to be most likely half-naked women or whatever they do in strip clubs in Thailand. I'm like, man, I don't know. Again, knowing myself, I just don't want to go in there and get off mission. I don't want to take myself to a place that I really don't want to be and don't need to be. So I prayed for months leading up to this, 2 or 3 months, to just give me the eyes of Jesus when I go into this into this operation, into this mission. And I'm telling you, it was a prayer answered like I had never seen before. I'd come out, we'd probably go in 8 or 10 brothels a night, and I'd come out, and I could not tell you if the girls were fully clothed or not. And I mean, it took 1 or 2 nights down there. I'm sorry, 1 or 2 brothels down there, and I knew that prayer was answered. And I guess you'd have to experience it to run. At that moment, I knew that it was the right decision that I went. The pieces kind of started coming together of people that I had ran into in trafficking leading up to this, and I knew that this is a fight that God wanted me in. He made it very obvious with answering that prayer. Sorry. I got to see God's light shine in one of the darkest places that I've ever been. For those of you that don't know what sex trafficking is, let me give you the definition. It's the recruitment and transportation of a person for the purpose of commercial sexual exploitation and profit. Now, I think one thing we mistake is that prostitution is not trafficking. Well, it is. These prostitutes have pimps or bosses, whatever you want to call them. And if they're involved at all in the sale transaction with these girls, that is sex trafficking. Let me give you a few stats here. It is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world, ahead of the drug and weapons trade. A big part is because drugs and weapons can be sold one time. A human being can be sold multiple times. Between labor and sex trafficking, there's an estimated 27 million slaves today. Sex trafficking alone brings in over $100 billion a year. And a big reason for that, let me touch on this real quick, and it's more in some of these other countries, but $100 billion a year. So these countries are relying on this industry that's coming in. So on the outside, they're saying, oh, we absolutely want to get rid of trafficking. What can we do? Yeah, these NGOs, these organizations, you're welcome to come in. Here, we'll show you where it's going on at. Well, you really got to sift through a lot of corruption between police and military to figure out who really means it. And that's the constant battle in some of these places, because you can go in and pull a girl out, but she's replaced. It's just like taking a product off a shelf. There'll be another one in there the next day. So they found that if you're not making arrests, there's not any real change. There's somewhere between 15 and 18,000 are trafficked into the United States every year. Most are women and children. And this is really interesting. I want to read you this small paragraph out of a book called How to Prevent the Traffic in Girls. All right? When we say on the public platform that there is an organized, systematized traffic in girls in America, a gasp of horror can actually be heard throughout the audience. And the people exclaim, "Girls bought and sold in America?" And we say, "Yes, dear friends, girls are bought and sold in our country." And they asked, "In a civilized Christian land?" And we answer, "Yes, in the land of Bibles, colleges, churches, and civilization." And they say, "Well, how can this be?" What's really interesting about this book is that it belongs to a friend of mine that lives in Vegas, in Las Vegas, called Mike Bartell. He runs a group called Free International. And that book was written in 1899. So that tells us that this is not a new problem. This is something that we have neglected for years because of the depths of the underworld where this problem exists. And the fact that, let's face it, most of us, probably in the class that we're in, or the type of people that we affiliate with, we probably don't run across a whole lot of traffickers, victims. We may. But I would say it's in our mind. If you're anything like me, I'm thinking this is something that goes on in other countries. Like this, surely this isn't right here in the U.S. I'm reading a book now called In Your Own Backyard, In Our Own Backyard, and it talks about how this does exist in every area, in every county of the country. The same Mike Bartell that I was just talking about with Free International, Scott and I were talking about it. He's actually talking about opening up an office in Tulsa in 2017, which these guys don't open up offices in areas that don't have trafficking. There's a reason why Tulsa was targeted. I'm not saying Tulsa is the only place. I'm telling you, it goes on everywhere. I live in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, southeast Kansas, and recently I've been involved in some, or been, I guess, privy to hear some things there where it's going on right down the road. There's a few main elements that go into trafficking. Sorry, let me touch on them quickly. Prevention, which is the big reason why I'm here, through a group called IJM that was hosting a Freedom Sunday, which we were going to do a couple weeks ago, and ended up scheduling didn't work out, so I made it today. And this is probably the global leader in counter and human trafficking, and it's called the International Justice Mission. In the States, it's not real common that a girl is kidnapped or stolen like it can be in other countries. This is typically out of a coercion. These pimps that are incredibly smart will come in and pose as a job interviewer or somebody that wants to be involved in the girl's life in the form of her boyfriend, or potentially talks about getting out of here and getting in a better life and moving on and getting married, and just kind of the schemes that these guys have worked up, and they usually have it going on multiple times with multiple women. And these girls, and I wish I knew more about this, the psychological effect that these guys have on these girls is something that I'll try to explain it. I obviously can never relate, but there's something they call traumatic bonding, which it's like the more abusive these guys are, and keep in mind we're talking about, at times 10, 12, 14-year-old girls. The more abusive they are, both physically and psychologically, the more bonded these girls feel, and the stronger that attachment is. And these players in the game have figured that out. I was with a group last night in St. Louis with called the Deliver Fund. I was there for a couple days. They had some meetings and a banquet. Awesome group, what they're doing on the cyber side of this, and some of the hackers and the guys that they have that have donated time to really dig into the internet side and the internet crimes against children. But I met a girl there who was a tattoo artist out of Miami, and her only job now is removing tattoos off these girls that have been branded. So they'll break these girls in, usually with heroin, and obviously raped multiple times, the physical abuse, to the point where they are completely broken and have no way out. In their mind, they literally have no way out. They feel like, and I totally get it, they feel like nobody cares about them, nobody loves them. I would say it's about as helpless feeling as you could have. But they will brand them, and she'll go in and either remove the tattoo or cover it up, and now it's to the point where she's got to get more people. Because there's so many victims coming in. Now you probably wonder how these girls could fall for this. And we need to keep in mind that these are some of the most deprived, some of the poorest, some of our most vulnerable that our country has. And these are the girls that they're targeting. The second part of that is the extraction, which is the physical work of rescuing these girls out of their situation. And it's different for every country. It's different here. It's different in Thailand. It was different in the Dominican. I got to go down there a couple months ago. I will say in Thailand, the goal was we would go in as Americans. If you're local, you're not allowed in these brothels. Americans, they just assume you have a lot of money, and they're more than willing to share whatever they have. So you'll go in, and we would have a camera. You would have audio and video, hidden cameras, and you would attempt to get the transaction between the pimp and the girl. And there was no purchase, there was no money exchanged. You would just kind of politely back out of the deal. You're shopping around. But the goal over there was to get enough evidence by going undercover and going in and becoming kind of one of these Johns or perverts that are in there, which was, again, that was one of the hardest parts. But the hope is that you get enough evidence that we can take it to local law enforcement, and they'll move, and they'll make arrests. The rehabilitation side, or the aftercare. If there's not quality aftercare, these girls end up right back where they started. And these girls I talked about the psychological damage. It can take years to get past the physical damage. They need a lot of treatment before they're whole again. The idea is you can get them into schools, you can teach them a trade, and at that time, you can kind of share or attempt to share why you did it and what our purpose is here, and share with them the hope that goes beyond the life on this earth, their hope for eternal life. But that can't be done until they're fixed and removed from these situations. So I have this vision often, and I still do, and I thank God for it as a constant reminder. But I have this picture of this girl sitting in a hotel room, and I can see it clear as day right now in my mind. She's sitting in a dark hotel room in the corner, and she's sitting there waiting for the next guy that's going to rape her to come through the door. And probably 13, 14-year-old girl, and she may not even be a believer. I don't know, but she's crying out and in a silent prayer for somebody to come save her. And this goes on for weeks and months, and nobody shows up. Nobody comes. Nobody answers. And sadly, this is reality to hundreds of thousands of girls like today, as we speak. I've been asked why I'm getting involved in something that I'm not trained to do. I'm a baseball player. no business being involved in something like that. Well, if that wasn't enough, this vision that I constantly have, my prayer being answered in Thailand when I asked to have the eyes of Jesus to go in and stay on mission. But the answer is yes, there is people doing this, just not nearly enough. Again, I was in the Dominican a couple months ago, and they told me there was 3 guys in charge of their whole counter-trafficking task force, which is, I mean, there's a lot of people in Dominican, and there's a huge issue there of human trafficking. We don't have near enough here in the States. The other question is, can you really put a dent in this problem? And has anybody ever heard the starfish story or the starfish theory? Well, I just heard it a year or two ago, and I love this. And I was told this story while I was in Thailand, and I may have been the one that asked the question, can we really make an impact on this issue of trafficking? Well, so there's a storm rolls in, and all these starfish, thousands of starfish blow up on the beach. And this little kid goes down there and sees all these starfish all over the beach. He's like, man, I need to save these starfish. So he starts picking them up and firing them back into the ocean. So this man walks down and he's like, son, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm saving these starfish. And the guy says, son, you're not going to save. Look up and down the beach. Like, you can see miles in both directions of starfish. You ain't saving all these starfish. And he picks one up and flips it out in the ocean and looks up. He goes, well, I saved that one. And that hit me like, that is so true. That, is it worth it if we go for a week or a month or a year and save 1 or 10? Or like, what's the number that makes it worth it? And we're just talking about starfish. But I love the analogy because we're talking about human beings and God's children at that. When I came home from my first trip, it hit me about as hard as anything ever has, that as followers of Christ, He doesn't want us to live in our little Christian bubbles and just be satisfied with, my Wednesday Bible studies as a kid and going to church every Sunday. He's asking for a lot more than that. God is saying to go and spread the good news of faith, hope, love, eternal life with everybody. That was Jesus' last words when He left the earth, was go and make disciples of all the nations. And those are the same words He's telling us today, is to go do something about it. My biggest fear anymore isn't dying. It's not the physical issues or the physical harm that could come from traveling around and getting involved in trafficking. Mine is that I'm going to get up and I'm going to stand before the King, which every one of us is going to do, whether we're excited about it or not. And God's saying, like, what were you doing? What were you doing? I gave you all this stuff, and I gave you the mission to go rescue these girls. Made it clear as day. I'm sitting here telling you guys right now, I know this is my mission. And Him just being like, man, you blew it. I gave you the mission, and you turned it down. I got an email yesterday from a friend. It came at the perfect time. Psalms 144. This is all he put in the email. No introduction, nothing. Psalms 44. He is my loyal love and stronghold, my secure refuge and my rescuer, my shield and the one who I have taken shelter. I love that because that is what we have in Christ. As believers, as followers, if we've accepted Christ, that's what we have. Well, these girls, I'm guessing most of them probably don't have that. I don't think they have anybody to shield them from anything. And I'll tell you, as a kid, I was a terrible kid. But one thing that always bothered me was when people that couldn't defend themselves were getting picked on for whatever reason. We won't go into stories. I was awful. That bothered me more than anything. And it still does today. And I think that's part of my drive of trying to help the helpless or defend people that can't defend themselves. But they don't have any rescuer. They don't have any refuge. And I'm a lot more concerned about their eternal lives than I am their physical lives. But I also know, as I said earlier, they have to be removed from these situations before we can do anything about their eternal life. Before we can ever start to share with them the hope that we have in our story in Christ. I got to tell this one last story. We got time? You sure? Has anybody ever heard, I didn't get to share this in the first service, has anybody ever heard of Harriet Tubman? Anybody? Well, Harriet was a slave in the 1800s, and as a child, her nickname was Stupid. So I'm assuming that she probably was a little slow. I'm guessing that people probably didn't think she was capable of accomplishing much. Well, somehow Harriet escapes, flees to the north, and as soon as she gets to safety, she has a vision or a calling, whatever you want to call it, from God that said, Harriet, you need to go back and rescue some people. Harriet goes back into the South, rescues some slaves that were complete strangers to her, gets back to the North. Well, she ends up making 19 trips back into the South to help rescue helpless people, which, by the way, people that she had never met before. So years later, a reporter asked her and said, Harriet, do you suppose the Lord... No, I'm sorry. A reporter asked her, why did you do this for so long, Harriet? And she said, do you suppose the Lord wanted me to do this for just a day or a week? No. The Lord meant for me to do this as long as I live, so that's what I'm going to do. How cool is that? You know, I'm not up here saying that all of our mission should be to get involved with slavery or trafficking by any means. But what I am saying is that we're called to do something. Something. And if I were to sit around for the rest of my baseball career and then on into retirement, waiting for that to fall into my lap, you know, it may or may not happen. We have to go after it. And I wish I would have done that 15, 20 years ago. I wish I would have taken it more serious when I was younger, instead of being so concerned about chasing all these things, which I just told you guys leads to a dead end. And anybody in here that's older knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's nothing there. But we're called to do something, and the only way to find out what that is to ask. And we got to keep asking until we get an answer.